Let me ask you something. Have you ever heard a compliment and felt a quick rush? That split second where you feel seen, appreciated, maybe even relieved, and then later, you replay it in your head, and something feels off. Not enough to call it manipulation, not obvious enough to confront, just a quiet tension you can't quite explain. Because the compliment didn't just describe you, it positioned you. From that moment on, you are subtly expected to stay the same, act the same, respond the same. Most people never notice this. They assume all praise is positive. They assume if something feels good, it must be good. But psychology doesn't work that way. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Compliments live in that unconscious space. They slip past your defenses because they don't sound like pressure. They don't sound like demands. They sound like approval. And that's exactly why they're powerful. A compliment can quietly shape how you see yourself. It can influence what you tolerate. It can decide which parts of you are rewarded and which parts are discouraged. And here's the part no one warns you about. Once you accept a compliment as an identity, you start protecting it. You hesitate before changing. You second-guess before pushing back. You stay consistent, even when consistency no longer serves you. That's not confidence. That's containment. So in this video, we're not talking about rejecting praise. We're talking about learning how to hear it clearly, because once you understand what a compliment is really doing, you stop reacting automatically. And once that happens, some compliments lose their grip on you forever. So why compliments are never just compliments? Most people hear compliments as simple observations. Something nice was said, end of story. But psychologically, a compliment is never neutral. When someone compliments you, they aren't just noticing a quality. They're choosing which part of you to highlight and which parts to ignore. That choice matters, because attention is never random. What gets named gets reinforced. So when someone says, "You're really easy to work with," it sounds harmless, even generous. But listen closely to what's being emphasized. Not your thinking, not your growth, not your boundaries. What's being praised is how smoothly you fit into the situation. That's not necessarily wrong, but it is directional. A compliment quietly signals what is valued and what is expected to continue. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The same applies to praise. If a compliment feels slightly uncomfortable, unusually specific, or oddly timed, that reaction isn't accidental. Your discomfort isn't rejection, it's awareness. Because some compliments don't reflect who you are. They reflect how someone benefits from you. For example, compliments like, "You're always so calm," "You never make things difficult," or "You're the dependable one," sound positive on the surface. But notice what they have in common. They all reward predictability. They don't describe effort or learning. They describe stability. And once stability becomes your defining feature, change becomes a problem. That's where compliments quietly shift from appreciation to management. They don't tell you what to do. They tell you who you are and who you're supposed to remain. Jung warned that identity becomes dangerous when it hardens. When a label replaces awareness, if you accept praise as a fixed definition, you begin to defend it, even when it no longer fits. You start editing yourself to stay aligned with the image that was rewarded. You hesitate before speaking up. You smooth over reactions you would have expressed, not because you're being dishonest, but because approval feels safer than disruption. And this is the hidden power of compliments. They bypass resistance. Criticism makes people push back. Praise makes people comply. That's why compliments are so effective at shaping behavior. They don't feel like pressure. They feel like confirmation. But confirmation can be limiting. Once you see this, you stop hearing compliments as simple truths. You start hearing them as signals about what's being encouraged, what's being discouraged, and what kind of version of you is being rewarded. And that awareness is where choice returns. Now let's talk about the compliment that freezes your identity. Some compliments don't lift you up. They hold you still. At first, they feel reassuring. They give you a sense of clarity. You think, okay, this is how I'm seen. But over time, that clarity turns into a cage. When someone says, "You're always so reliable," or "You're the calm one," or "You never make things complicated," it sounds like respect. But notice what's really happening. The compliment isn't describing a moment. It's describing a role. And once a role is assigned, consistency becomes expected. You're no longer responding as yourself in each situation. You're responding as the version of you that was praised. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Why is that terrifying? Because full self-acceptance includes contradiction. It includes growth. It includes the right to change your tone, your limits, and your direction. Compliments that freeze identity do the opposite. They reward sameness. They make deviation feel risky. After enough repetition, you start monitoring yourself. You catch yourself thinking, "That's not how I usually act," or "That's not what people expect from me." And without realizing it, you adjust. Not because it's dishonest, but because breaking the image feels like breaking connection. This is how praise quietly becomes pressure. The moment you step outside the complimented identity, reactions change. Surprise, confusion, sometimes subtle resistance. Not because you're wrong, but because you violated an unspoken agreement. You were supposed to stay in character. Jung understood this deeply. He warned against confusing the self with the mask that gets rewarded. When identity becomes fixed, growth feels like betrayal of others and of yourself. That's why these compliments are so powerful. They don't demand anything outright. They create a silent contract. Be this, and approval continues. Change, and it becomes uncertain. And once approval feels conditional, freedom shrinks. You may start choosing responses that preserve the compliment rather than express the truth. You remain steady when you want to push. You stay agreeable when you want to assert. You stay predictable when unpredictability would be honest. Over time, the compliment no longer feels good. It feels heavy. Because what once sounded like recognition is now an obligation. And the most important realization here is this. If a compliment makes you afraid to evolve, it was never about supporting you. It was about keeping you consistent. Once you see that, the freeze begins to thaw. Now let's talk about flattery versus recognition. Not all compliments are created equal. Some of them leave you clearer, others leave you smaller, and the difference isn't volume, enthusiasm, or warmth. It's where the compliment lands. Recognition focuses on what you did. Flattery focuses on who you supposedly are. That distinction sounds subtle, but it changes everything. When someone says, "That took effort," or "You handled that well," the praise stays connected to action. It doesn't define you. It doesn't trap you. You can grow past it without losing anything. But flattery works differently. Flattery skips behavior and goes straight to identity. You're just naturally good at this. This is who you are. You're perfect for this role. At first, that feels powerful. It sounds affirming. even comforting. But notice the cost. If it's who you are, then changing feels like breaking character. If it's natural, then effort disappears from the story. If it's perfect, then improvement feels unnecessary or unwelcome. Carl Jung warned, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Flattery helps with that avoidance. It creates a clean, finished image, an identity that doesn't need questioning. And finished identities are easy to manage. Flattery rewards predictability. Recognition allows movement. That's why flattery often feels intense but shallow. It lifts you quickly and holds you in place. Recognition, on the other hand, may feel quieter, but it leaves you room to evolve. Here's a simple way to tell the difference. After the compliment, do you feel expanded or narrowed? Do you feel free to explore new responses or subtly pressured to maintain the version that was praised? Flattery often carries an invisible expectation. Stay this way, not spoken, not enforced, just implied. And the more you accept it without reflection, the more you begin to organize yourself around it. Jung understood how dangerous this can be. When identity becomes something to protect rather than examine, awareness collapses. You stop asking who you're becoming and start defending who you've been labeled as. That's the quiet costs of flattering praise. It doesn't attack you, it seduces you. And once you see that, the illusion weakens. Recognition doesn't need you to stay the same. Flattery does, and learning to tell them apart is one of the fastest ways to regain psychological freedom. Now let's talk about when praise becomes a lever. This is the moment where compliments stop being passive and start doing work. Once someone sees what kind of praise you respond to, they gain influence, often without meaning to, and sometimes very intentionally. Praise becomes a lever when it's repeated in the same direction. If you're often told, "You're so dependable," pay attention to when that praise appears. It rarely shows up randomly. It tends to arrive right before more responsibility is added, or right after you've accepted something without resistance. The compliment isn't the reward, it's the setup. The same thing happens with praise like, "You're so understanding," or "You always keep things smooth." Over time, those words become cues. They signal what behavior is expected next. And the moment you feel pressure to live up to a compliment, the shift has already happened. That pressure doesn't feel like force. It feels like obligation. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Praise operates quietly in that unconscious space. It doesn't argue with you. It doesn't demand. It reinforces, and reinforcement is powerful because it feels earned. You start anticipating the praise. You adjust before anyone asks. You smooth your reactions in advance, not because someone ordered you to, but because you've learned what gets rewarded. That's how praise reshapes behavior without confrontation. It doesn't remove your choices, it narrows them. Over time, you may notice a strange pattern. You feel responsible for maintaining an image you didn't consciously choose. You hesitate before expressing a reaction that might disrupt the identity that's been praised. And the more the compliment is tied to approval, the harder it is to step outside it. This is why praise is often more effective than criticism. Criticism triggers defense. Praise triggers alignment. You lean toward the behavior that keeps the positive response coming. Jung understood that anything operating beneath awareness gains control. When you don't see the lever, it moves you. But the moment you notice the pattern, the leverage weakens. The praise loses its automatic pull. You stop reacting to it as instruction and start hearing it as information. And that shift, small as it seems, is the difference between being guided and being directed. Once you see how praise functions as leverage, you regain choice. And with choice, the lever no longer moves you so easily. So how to receive a compliment without getting trapped? At this point, you might be thinking that the solution is to stop accepting compliments altogether. It's not. Rejecting praise doesn't give you freedom. It just replaces one reaction with another. The real shift is learning how to receive a compliment without letting it define you. That starts with slowing down internally. When someone compliments you, there's usually an automatic response, a smile, a nod, a reflexive agreement. That speed is what allows the label to stick. So instead of reacting immediately, notice what the compliment highlights. Is it pointing to effort, learning, or a specific action? Or is it turning a behavior into an identity? For example, there's a difference between hearing, "That took patience," and "You're such a patient person." One describes a moment. The other defines a character. You don't have to correct the person. You don't have to explain yourself. You just need to avoid reinforcing the identity. A calm, neutral response does that naturally. Something simple, unemotional, grounded. You're not denying the compliment. You're keeping it from becoming a rule. Another important shift is noticing how the compliment makes you feel after it lands. Do you feel open, or do you feel a subtle sense of pressure to maintain something? Pressure is a signal. It doesn't mean the compliment was wrong. It means it came with an expectation. Once you notice that, you regain choice. You can appreciate the recognition without organizing your future behavior around it. Carl Jung said, "Freedom is not achieved by suppressing what we think, but by understanding it." The same principle applies here. Understanding what praise is doing internally is what gives you freedom from it. You don't have to challenge the compliment. You don't have to earn it again. You simply stop using it as a mirror for your identity. That's the key. Compliments are information, not instructions. They tell you how you're being perceived in a moment. They don't tell you who you are. When you separate those two, praise loses its ability to trap you. You can accept appreciation and still change direction. You can be recognized and still evolve. You can be praised and still choose differently next time. And once you respond this way consistently, something subtle happens. Compliments that were meant to steer you stop appearing. They no longer get the reaction they were designed for. What remains is cleaner, quieter recognition. The kind that doesn't ask you to stay the same. And that's how you receive a compliment without giving away control. Now let's discuss the power of pausing before you accept praise. Here's something most people never consider. The pause is your most powerful tool when it comes to compliments. Think about it. Every time you react instantly to praise, you hand over control. Your smile, your nod, your thank you becomes a confirmation of the role that was just assigned to you. But what if you could pause, not to reject it, not to overthink it, but just to notice it? When someone compliments you, take a moment and ask yourself silently, what part of me is this praise pointing to? Does it celebrate effort, action, or result? Or does it define a trait, a role, a label that I'm now expected to keep performing? That pause creates awareness. Awareness breaks the automatic reflex. Awareness lets you see the compliment for what it is, a signal, not a mandate. For example, imagine someone says, "You're so organized." On instinct, most people smile, thank them, and carry on. But the real question is, Do you now feel pressure to always be organized? Are you unconsciously editing yourself to match their perception? This is where the pause makes all the difference. When you pause, even for a second, you create space. Space to notice your own reaction. Space to decide whether you accept the praise as information or as an instruction. Space to protect your evolving identity from being frozen. Carl Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." Looking inside doesn't mean rejecting compliments. It means understanding them before they can influence you unconsciously. The pause also trains you to spot patterns over time. If you notice that every time someone praises your reliability, extra tasks follow, or expectations mount, you're seeing a system in action. Compliments are not just words, they're tools that can shape behavior subtly, and once you spot the system, you reclaim your autonomy. Pausing also allows you to reclaim authenticity in your response. Instead of automatically reinforcing a label, you can respond in a way that's neutral and grounded. A simple, "Thank you. I appreciate that," delivered with calm awareness, communicates gratitude without handing over control. And here's the hidden bonus. The longer you practice this pause, the more others start adjusting. Compliments lose their hidden power because they no longer trigger the automatic response they were designed to elicit. You're no longer being nudged by flattery or predictability. You're no longer the version of yourself that everyone expects. You become the person who receives praise consciously, who keeps your identity flexible and your choices free. This isn't just theory. It's practical psychology in action, and it changes everything. Once you understand the pause, you realize the compliment itself is harmless. The danger comes from the speed of your reaction. Slow down, notice, decide, and suddenly praise can't trap you anymore. In other words, the power isn't in resisting, the power is in choosing. Now that we've explored how compliments can shape, restrict, and even steer behavior, here's the truth most people never fully grasp. Compliments only have the power you give them. That's it. Once you start noticing how praise operates, whether it freezes identity, leverages behavior, or flattens growth, you stop being moved automatically. You stop reacting reflexively. You stop giving away your agency. Imagine someone says, "You're always so dependable." And instead of feeling obligated to live up to that image, you hear it as a simple observation. Not a rule, not a label, not an expectation. That shift alone changes everything. Carl Jung said, "Freedom is not achieved by suppressing what we think, but by understanding it." And here's the key. Understanding what a compliment is actually doing is what gives you freedom from it. Once you consistently respond this way, two things happen simultaneously. First, compliments that were never about you stop working. They lose their hidden leverage because they no longer trigger automatic reactions. You no longer feel pressure to maintain someone else's version of you. The labels they try to attach no longer stick. Second, the compliments that matter, the ones tied to genuine recognition, remain. They don't demand compliance. They don't freeze you in a role. They acknowledge growth, effort, and action without turning it into a cage. And because you respond consciously, they reinforce insight, not expectation. This is why learning to receive praise is as much about psychology as it is about self-awareness. So the next time someone says, "You're amazing at this," or "You're always so patient," don't ask, "Is this true?" Ask, "What does this expect me to be?" And then decide consciously. Decide whether that version belongs to you. Decide whether you will let it guide you or simply note it and keep moving. Because once you learn that, compliments stop controlling you. They stop steering your identity. They lose their hidden power. And what's left is simple, quiet, conscious freedom. The power never leaves you. It was yours to reclaim all along.